better foundation for our understanding for our own faith. We give you the praise and thanksgiving in your name, Jesus. Amen. Okay, so this evening we are going to deal with two subjects, as I mentioned to you. Um, we're dealing with another critical issue. Again, this is one of the turning points of the war. So you might ask, why are there so many turning points in the war? And that's because we were outmanned. We were out. They were much more professional than us, and so it would happen that we would go for a long period of time, as we saw last week, with a bunch of losses or just hanging in there. And then all of a sudden there would be a turnaround, and that's what it's about tonight. It's going to be taking a look at Valley Forge in the winter of 1776-77, and then we're going to go from that right into the Battle of the Battle of who? No, we're gonna. Man, my mind just went blank on that one. We're we're going to be going when they get there. We'll see what it is. The point being is that first battle in June, following the Valley Forge encampment, was a turnaround moment, and so we'll take a look at that. And as we get going, first I want to give you a quote. This quote was from President Donald Trump in remembrance of 9/11. He gave this quote in 2019. Quote: "Today we take a sacred vow to remember our history." A sacred vow. Today we take a sacred vow to remember our history. So you think about what we're doing. You know, this is it. This is what we're doing. We're remembering our history from a providential point of view. Because to me, that's what brings it alive, because it's truth. Then we can see how God, worked through history. The battle we're going to take a look at tonight is the Battle of Monmouth, New Jersey. Just skipped my mind there for a minute. Okay, so last week we took a look at the Battle of Saratoga, and we took a look at several miracles that took place. Chiefly among those was the winds that kept the ships away from bringing in replacements and food and munitions and so forth for 3 months. A contrary wind that kept the British from coming until it was too late. And then we won that war, took 6,000 prisoners, and this is where the French decided to come in. Now, the French and the British have been going after it for decades, if not over a century. And so as soon as they saw that we were a viable enemy for winning the war against Britain, they immediately came in and did really help us in getting the victory. I brought tonight also over here. I brought this for purpose. This is from 1940. This blanket here, and on the blanket it says Valley Forge Military Academy. This was my dad's. He attended Valley Forge Military Academy in Pennsylvania in 1940, and so this is a commendation or a letter here, a citation, which speaks of that. And so I thought, and then this here is it says courage, honor, conquer. Do we have a picture of that one? Can we get that up there? I think we do, don't we, Leo? Because I wanted you to see something on it. No, don't. That's the cheat sheet. Can you pull that up, or should we go on? Okay. Anyway, in it, what I thought was really important. Okay. What I thought was really neat was that's the center medallion. It's George Washington praying at Valley Forge, which we'll see in a little bit too. Okay, so let's pick it up here. If you recall, at this point, the British are going to come in response to Saratoga. They're going to come to Philadelphia. If you remember, we showed the picture last week of the map, and General Howe was coming up from New York. And instead of coming to help in the battle that was going on at Saratoga, he decided to go up to Philadelphia because he had heard what was going on there. So Howe led his troops up there, and they took Philadelphia. And so the Continental Congress, they headed out of town, and also Valley Forge, well, I should say it this way, George Washington did not take his men to Philadelphia, but went down to Valley Forge. Now, Valley Forge is only 25 miles from Philadelphia. So the entire winter, you're going to have the American army within 25 miles of the enemy that's taken over Philadelphia. But again, no one's going to war at this point, okay? Because they've gone through the struggles of war over a year period of time, and it's very cold, very inclement weather. So they're bivouacked at Valley Forge, speaking of the American troops. On December 19, 1777, 11,000 American troops lodged for the winter at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, which, as I mentioned, is only 25 miles from the enemy's troops. The ages of the American soldiers at Valley Forge were aged 12 to 60. Everybody's involved. Remember, this is not a professional army. The Americans are not a remember, one of the heroes of the war was Henry Knox, and he was a bookseller. He had a bookstore in Boston, Massachusetts. I mean, this was whoever believed in the American cause, they came and aided. They came and helped. Okay, so that's really the state of the affairs there. The American soldiers consisted of Caucasians, blacks, and Native Americans, indigenous American Indians. Over the 6-month encampment, 11,000 soldiers. Over the 6-month encampment, 25,000 died at the encampment due to starvation and sickness. What did I say? Oh, 2,500. Yeah, 2,500 soldiers of the 11,000, died. Okay, and that's significant. And as a matter of fact, let me read you a quote from George Washington about the state of affairs there, because they would go literally 3 and 4 days at a time without food. They had to get food. We'll see in a minute that President Washington, not President yet, General Washington was continually writing to Congress trying to seek help, for the sad state that they were in. Here's what George Washington stated, quote, "No history can furnish an instance of an army suffering such uncommon hardships as ours has done, and bearing them with the same patience and fortitude, to see men without clothes to cover their nakedness, without blankets to lay on, without shoes, by which their marches might be traced by the blood from their feet, and almost as often without provisions, marching through snow and frost, and at Christmas taking up their winter quarters within a day's march of the enemy, without a house or hut to cover them, and submitting to it without a whimper, is a mark of patience and obedience which, in my opinion, can scarce be paralleled." So I was talking, I'm going to share something with you from Victor Provencio in just a minute. I talked to him today, a lengthy conversation on the phone, and he was mentioning, and we were talking back and forth about it's very difficult. Here I am giving you the information and all, but whether it's for me or for you, it's really hard to grasp the suffering that these people went through. We're talking about 1777. We're talking about you're in a situation with no provisions, that you're trying to get stuff from the people around you, in the community and all. And it's just a very difficult situation. Additionally, a committee from Congress wrote, quote, "Feet froze and legs froze till they became black, then it was often necessary to amputate them." Okay, that's what they were dealing with. A Massachusetts man wrote, quote, "I have seen the soldiers turned out in such poor condition that I could not refrain from tears. It would melt the heart of a savage to see the state we are in." And then Lafayette, who is here, he's one of the French that was with us at this time, wrote this concerning, they went through a progress. A little bit later, after George Washington wrote this, they were able to build some makeshift huts, some huts for the guys. But this is what Lafayette said. He said, their huts are, quote, "scarcely gayer than dungeon cells." So that was the state of affairs there. Okay, so I spoke to Victor Provencio. How many remember Victor? Okay, well, some of us here do. They were with us for years, but he lives in Los Angeles now. And he was just sharing about his experiences. And David, could you go ahead and turn the heat off now, please? We had it earlier just to get the chill off. Thank you. And he shared with me that as a fifth grader in 1950 in Los Angeles public schools, this is what he was taught to memorize. And here it is, 2025. He didn't do this reading it, he did it from his memory. Okay? Because this is what he was taught in 1950. Snow, quote, snow, snow, and cruel bitter cold, and a century pacing through the long bleak night. Hunger and thirst were met at Valley Forge, and brave men would suffer for liberty and right. But the cause of liberty rallied, and it rose like the sun. Tyranny fell back vanquished, and the war was won. They shall suffer no more, neither thirst any more. These men who gave their all, and their memory still lingers in each true American heart. Now, I do that for two reasons. Number one is it's very apropos for us discussing Valley Forge. But number two, we're talking about 1950. And recall, 1962-63 is when the dismantling of God in the public schools took place. So you can't really expect the public schools under the present system to be talking about the wonderful works of God, the miracles that God did in the American Revolution, because you've taken God out. Okay? And so here you see 1950, what is a fifth grader, he was taught and memorized and how it stayed with him. Okay? And then, again, what we're doing right here, getting back to President Trump's statement again. Today we entered into a sacred vow not to forget our history. So really what we're doing here, based on Joshua 4, based on Acts 2, is restoring that which has been really stolen from us. Because if you want to speak about patriotism and what you instill in the youth, that they will be patriotic, they'll honor those that came before us. It's really about these stories. It's about the history. And especially for us as Christians, it's the godly history which stands out. General Washington was relentless this winter campaign in an attempt to save his soldiers from dying and the dissolution of the American Army. Quote, Washington's soldiers always knew where he was and what he was doing. From December to March, he produced hundreds of letters and official reports, all bent to one purpose, their welfare, the men's welfare. On January 29th, he dictated a massive 41-page report on reforming the Army, not for him or Congress, but for the soldiers and ultimately the American people. A sentry or courier passing by his headquarters, which sometimes was a tent, then also a building, on a wintry night might have seen all the windows dark except for Washington's, where the candle burned bright until the early hours. And that's, they loved George Washington because of what he did on the battlefield, what he did in terms of sacrificing every ounce of his time to better the situation for the men. Remember, they gave him complete charge of the military. And so it was really dependent on him how things were going to fare. At this time, amidst the most awful of circumstances, Benjamin Franklin negotiated with Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben to come to America to train the American troops. Now, this will be very important because this will be considered part of the miracle of Valley Forge. And when I say miracle, it's because of what I'm going to share with you in just a minute. And everybody I'm sharing here has seen the picture of George Washington kneeling in prayer at Valley Forge. Okay? I believe what I'm sharing with you right now is an answer to that prayer. Okay? Because they were in a desperate situation. And let's get into it a little bit more here. Von Steuben had spent years in the Prussian army and providentially happened to be out of work in Paris when Franklin arrived in Paris. Now, the next part of it, this comes straight out of a history book, okay? And I included it this time because I really want you to get a feel for Baron von Steuben too, because when we get to the end, you'll see why. This is specifically taken about a bibliography of his life. Born into a military family, Steuben was exposed to war from an early age. At 14 years old, he observed his father directing Prussian engineers in the 1744 siege of Prague. At age 16 or 17, he enlisted in the Prussian army, which was considered the most professional and disciplined in Europe. During his 17 years of military service, Steuben took part in several battles in the 7 Years' War, rose to the rank of captain, and became aide-de-camp to King Frederick II of Prussia. We heard a quote from him last week, considering Princeton and Trenton, that he was the one that said those 10 days are the most important in history. Okay? And so he was aide-de-camp for him. I'm speaking of Steuben, who was renowned for his military prowess and strategy, meaning Frederick II. Steuben's career culminated in his attendance of Frederick's elite school for young military officers, after which he was abruptly discharged from the army in 1763, allegedly by the machinations of a rival. So he obviously had someone that did not like him, and somehow they persuaded them that he was unfit to be in the service. Okay, that's how God got him out, if I can put it that way. But isn't that so typical today? Has anything really changed? Considering the fact of people being envious of other people, people doing things to get people fired, to put them out of the service or whatever. It's just, to me, just so typical. There's nothing new under the sun. And I'm going to make that point even stronger in just a minute. Steuben spent 11 years as court chamberlain to the prince of a small German principality. In 1769, the Duchess of Württemberg, a niece of Frederick, named him to the Order of Fidelity, a meritorious award that conferred the title of Free Lord to him. And that happened in 1771. His service to another earned him the title Baron. In 1775, as the American Revolution had begun, Steuben saw a reduction in his salary and sought some form of military work. Unable to find employment in peacetime Europe, he joined the U.S. war effort through mutual French contacts with U.S. diplomats, most notably ambassadors to France Silas Deane and Benjamin Franklin. Due to his military exploits and his willingness to serve the Americans without compensation. Does that sound at all familiar? George Washington served without compensation, and we see the same thing repeating itself right now with President Trump and Elon Musk. Due to his military exploits and his willingness to serve the Americans without compensation, Steuben made a positive impression on both Congress and General George Washington, who appointed him as temporary Inspector General of the Continental Army. Appalled by the state of the U.S. forces, Steuben took the lead in teaching soldiers the essentials of military drills, tactics, and discipline based on Prussian techniques. And what made this even more remarkable is he spoke no English. He only spoke German and French. And so what he would do is he would do everything hands-on. He would go up to the men, he would grab them by the shoulder, he'd put them in the positions that they were supposed to do, and then run the drills. And that's how he would do this. And yet it was it really helped in terms of communicating the process. And as we get to the Battle of Monmouth, we'll see the results of it. He wrote quote, regulations for the order and discipline of the troops of the United States. I'm speaking of he did, okay, which remained the Army's drill manual for decades and continues to influence modern U.S. Army manuals. That's what Steuben wrote. Steuben also addressed widespread administrative waste and graft. That sound at all familiar? Let me read it again. Steuben also addressed widespread administration waste and graft. There is nothing new under the sun. What was before will be again, okay? Because these are human issues we're dealing with. Greed, graft, all these human issues, okay? Steuben also waste and graft, helping save desperately needed supplies and funds. As these reforms began bearing fruit, and again, this is not something I wrote. This is something that's quoted from a history book, okay? As these reforms began bearing fruit on the battlefield in 1778, Congress, on Washington's recommendation, commissioned Steuben to position of Inspector General with the rank of Major General. He served the remainder of the war as Washington's chief of staff and one of his most trusted advisors. After the war, Steuben was made a U.S. citizen and granted a large estate in New York in reward for his service. In 1780, he was elected as a member of the American Philosophical Society, a learned society that included many of the nation's most prominent founding fathers. Von Steuben quickly had a positive effect on the unorganized American soldiers and turned the undisciplined and suffering soldiers into the formidable army that would send the larger British army packing at the Battle of Monmouth. It was during these Valley Forge trials that General Washington sought the Lord in earnest. Okay, so here you got to get the situation. They've won at Saratoga, but it's horrendous what they're going through. They're down to 11,000 men. They're at Valley Forge, and this is where we have the picture of George Washington on his knees praying to the Lord. It was during these Valley Forge trials that General Washington sought the Lord in earnest. In Diary and Remembrances of Reverend Nathaniel Rudolph Snowden, no relation to another Snowden, okay, a Presbyterian minister and a Princeton graduate, Snowden records, quote, "I was riding with him, Mr. Potts, near Valley Forge, where the army lay during the War of the Revolution. Mr. Potts was a senator in our state and a Whig. I told him I was agreeably surprised to find him a friend of his country, as the Quakers were mostly Tories." So obviously this state senator was a Quaker, okay? And so if you know anything about the history of Quakers, they don't fight in wars. One of the great stories, oh my goodness, who was the hero of World War One? The sharpshooter. What? Alvin York, yeah, and he was Quaker also. And if you see the movie, you read the story about Alvin York, you realize what he had to go through to deal with the fact that it was okay for him to shoot and kill the enemy in the war. Anyway, I told him I was agreeably surprised to find him a friend to his country, as the Quakers were mostly Tories. He said, quote, "It was so, and I was a rank Tory once, for I never believed that America could proceed against Great Britain, whose fleets and armies covered the land and ocean. But something very extraordinary converted me to the good faith." "What was that?" I inquired. "Do you see the woods in that plain? It was about a quarter of a mile from the place we were riding. There," said he, "lay the army of Washington. It was a most distressing time of the war, and all were for giving up the ship, but that one good man," referring to Washington. "In that woods," pointing to a close-in view, "I heard a plaintive sound as of a man in prayer. I tied my horse to a sapling and went quietly into the woods, and to my astonishment I saw the great George Washington on his knees, alone, with his sword on one side and his cocked hat on the other. He was at prayer to the God of the armies, beseeching to interpose with his divine aid, as it was the crisis and the cause of the country, of humanity, and of the world. Such a prayer I never heard from the lips of a man. I left him alone praying. I went home and told my wife. And this is what he told his wife, "I saw a sight and heard today what I never saw or heard before," and just related to her what I had seen and heard and observed. "We never thought a man could be a soldier and a Christian. But if there is one in the world, it is Washington. We thought it was the cause of God, and America could prevail." As winter was ending on April 12, 1778, General Washington issued the following order. Okay, so they came the end of December. They're going to be there December, January, February, March, April, May, June will be the Battle of Monmouth. So during that time, they are being trained. Okay? Here's Washington issued the following order on April 12, 1778. The Honorable Congress, having thought proper to recommend to the United States of America to set apart Wednesday the 22nd instant to be observed as a day of fasting, humiliation, and prayer, that at one time and with one voice the righteous dispensations of providence may be acknowledged, and his goodness and mercy towards our arms supplicated and implored. The general directs that the day shall be most religiously observed in the army, that no work shall be done thereon, and that the several chaplains do prepare discourses. This was followed on May 2nd. I want you to notice how he ends this. This was followed on May 2nd with General Washington ordering, quote, the Commander-in-Chief directs that divine service be performed every Sunday. To the distinguished character of patriot, it should be our highest glory to laud the more distinguishing character of Christian. See, when you really get back to how they lived, what they believed, what they wrote, what they said, you find out that a lot of the nonsense, a lot of the untruths that are spoken of today about our founders and the early part of our nation is just untrue. That it was normal for both Benjamin Franklin, we saw it, now we see with George Washington, to refer to our nation in Christian terms. Okay, and the army is Christians. That's an even better term, he says there, than just referring to the men as patriots. Okay, the Battle of Monmouth. Then on June 28th, here we are on June 28th, 1776, General Washington engaged the British at Monmouth, New Jersey. The Battle of Monmouth was the first battle led by General Washington since the winter of training under Baron von Steuben. Despite being outnumbered and facing a seemingly superior enemy, the American army managed to hold its own and even inflict more casualties than it received. This was seen as a testament to the training and discipline instilled at Valley Forge. The Americans forced the enemy to retreat, and General Washington's reputation and that of the American army grew. As a side note here, in the Battle of Monmouth, a really interesting thing happened. As you know, in a battle, you have, say, Washington's got his group of men, but he's got other generals coming, say, from the right flank, the left flank, waiting behind as a secondary charge and so forth. And so one of his chief generals was General Charles Lee. And General Lee did an absolutely terrible job. What was that? Okay, and so he did... The whole thing was falling apart. The guys were deserting in the middle of the fight and all. And George Washington was so incensed, he went out and he took him off of the field, stripped his rank, gave it to someone else that you've heard of, Nathaniel Greene, and turned their section around. Okay, in that regard, George Washington that night after this chief battle slept on the field with his men, and when they got up in the morning, they were preparing to engage again. But when they sent their guys out to see what the British were doing, they were gone. In other words, the British realized they could not overcome them. It would be considered a draw, but for the American force, after getting all the training and then holding their own against a superior force, the enthusiasm went through the roof. I could compare it to sports. Okay, if a team, say a football team, is terrible, and they get a new coach in, new coaches in, and they train them, and then they go into the new season and they play a team that beat them 45-0 the year before, and now they lose 21-20. They're ecstatic, not because they didn't win, but they saw the improvement. They saw that they had a chance, and it would instill greater enthusiasm, and that's just how it works. Okay. This is also where the story of Molly Pitcher begins. Molly, her real name was Mary Hayes, and her husband lived in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He was at Valley Forge that winter of 1777 as a member of the American artillery. When the American army left to engage the British at Monmouth, Molly went along with other women, including Martha Washington. So Martha Washington and Molly Hayes were both at Valley Forge during that long winter. And the women there would help. They would serve meals. They would tend to there were so many soldiers that were either sick or injured there. Believe me, it would have been a full-time job just ministering to the camp. So now they move from Valley Forge. They're going to the first battle, and here come the women along to help again. And it would really be needed here in this battle because it'll be 107 degrees on the battlefield. Okay? It was extremely hot and humid, and many of the soldiers were fainting from heat exhaustion. 107 degrees. Nearly 100 soldiers died of heat exhaustion in this battle. Think about that for a second. Nearly 100 soldiers died of heat exhaustion in this battle. Mary, as well as other women, ran out onto the battlefield carrying pitchers of water, and both the exhausted troops for both the exhausted troops and for the cleaning of the artillery cannons. The men would yell to her to bring water, and this is where the title of Molly Pitcher originated. When Mr. Hayes, her husband, was injured in battle and carried from the field, Molly grabbed the ramrod and took over her husband's position at his cannon. As she stepped over with one foot for a cannonball, so it didn't hit her, leaving the other foot in place, another cannonball flew between her legs and tore off the bottom of her skirt. Molly Pitcher responded, "Well, that could have been worse," and went back to loading the cannon. Private Joseph Plum Martin recorded the event in his memoirs, stating, quote, "A woman whose husband belonged to the artillery and who was then attached to a piece in the engagement attended with her husband at the piece," meaning the cannon, "the whole time. While in the act of reaching a cartridge and having one of her feet as far before the other as she could step, a cannon shot from the enemy passed directly between her legs without doing any other damage than carrying away all the lower part of her petticoat." After the battle, General Washington asked about the woman whom he had seen loading a cannon on the battlefield. In commemoration of her courage, he issued Mary Hayes a warrant as a non-commissioned officer. Afterwards, she was known as Sergeant Molly, a nickname that she used for the rest of her life. Now, when we hand out the papers in just a minute, I'm not done yet, but when we hand it out, the title, what's the letter for today? G, yes. Okay, here's what it is. 2,500 graves, Valley Forge during the winter, a German general, and a gutsy gal. Okay, lots of G's there for tonight. Okay, let's go on with this. Following the war, Molly moved back to Carlisle. Her husband died in 1786. Now remember that date, 1786. Her husband died in 1786. She then earned her living as a general servant for hire, cleaning and painting houses, washing windows, and caring for children and sick people. Sergeant Molly was often seen in the streets of Carlisle, Pennsylvania, wearing a striped shirt, wool stockings, and a ruffled cap. She was well liked by the people of Carlisle. Now, what date did I have you remember? On February 21st, 1822, she's still alive, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania awarded Mary an annual pension of $40 for her service. Mary died January 22nd, 1832 in Carlisle at the approximate age of 78. She is buried in the old graveyard in Carlisle under a statue of Molly Pitcher standing alongside a cannon in the cemetery. This is her. Isn't that amazing? It's also the fulfillment, although the person didn't know they were given a prophetic prayer. We'll see it in a minute. It's also a fulfillment of prophecy. Okay. The Battle of Monmouth ended in a draw, with the British retreating to New York. Regardless, Monmouth was significant in the sense that it was one of the battles that helped turn the tide of the overall Revolutionary War. Outnumbered revolutionaries managed to stand toe-to-toe with arguably the greatest army on earth. George Washington's earnest prayer was answered when an out-of-work German military instructor providentially met Benjamin Franklin in Paris and volunteered to travel to America and train the American troops free of charge, and fulfilled a prayer. How many remember back, maybe 3 weeks ago, when we talked about the crisis? Thomas Paine's book, The Crisis. Remember George Washington read it to the troops to encourage them? Do you happen to remember one line in it? Well, let me give you a little help. Yeah, but that's not the one I'm going to. That's the head. Here's what I'm going for. Remember now, Thomas Paine will choose atheism after he gets out of the war. Okay, but up to this time he was raised by Christians, and when he wrote the book, the pamphlet, The Crisis, he wrote it as a Christian. He referred to himself as a Christian. He referred to God answering prayer and praying to God for answers to prayer and so forth. Okay, so he wrote at that time as a Christian. All right. In that, he wrote this. You ready? Would that heaven might inspire some Jersey maid to spirit up her countrymen and save her fair fellow sufferers from ravage and ravishment. Guess what? Molly Pitcher was born in Trenton, New Jersey. He asked for God to raise up a New Jersey maid. Remember, he said Joan of Arc during the 100 Years' War. Joan of Arc was a leader, for France and became a patron saint of France. And he used that illustration. Then here's a guy who's going to choose atheism. But before he did that, he actually gave something that came true. It was funny in the first service today because I said, well, she's actually from Pennsylvania, right? Because she's buried in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. So I had Meryl back there's on her phone. And she's looking and she says, guess what? She was born in Trenton, New Jersey. She is a New Jersey maid. I said, that's exciting to me because here it is. Let me read it again. Would that heaven might inspire some Jersey maid to spirit up her countrymen and save her fair fellow sufferers from ravage and ravishment. Put it back up there if you would, please. Here it is. 2025. And there's the tribute to her. As a matter of fact, in this that I'm going to hand out, as a matter of fact, why don't we go ahead and hand these out? Jude, do you want to hand these out? She asked to do this.
Do the children too?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have any sheets from last week?
They're out there in the, yeah. Make sure everybody gets one. Somebody, if you've got your phone, look up Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4. Somebody look up Hebrews 11, verse 4. Oh, you got about good. Whoever gets it, get your hand up in the air so I can call you. Who's got it? Hebrews 11, 4. Okay, what does it say, Jane?
By faith Abel offered to God a more excellent sacrifice than Cain, through which he obtained witness that he was righteous, and God testifying of his gifts, and by it being dead and yet speaketh.
Yet dead speaketh, right? Okay.
Yes.
Look at this with me. The title, 2,500 Graves, a German General and a Gutsy Gal. Everybody got one? Here we go. The winter of 1777-78. This is the one-page summary that I promised each week I'd give out. The winter of 1777-78 at Valley Forge was a brutal test for our American Army. Over 2,500 men perished due to awful conditions, sickness, and lack of food. Women, including Martha Washington, served our beleaguered soldiers that harsh winter. At that time, the Army was untrained. They needed a miracle. The miracle came in answer to Washington's prayers. Benjamin Franklin met Baron Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben in Paris, France. Providentially, out of work, he agreed to train the Americans at Valley Forge for no pay. What happened that winter was truly a miracle. Von Steuben only spoke French and German. As a result, he would communicate through physically placing the soldiers in formations and walking them through their routines. Their first post-winter battle took place at Monmouth, New Jersey. Under the leadership of Washington and Nathanael Greene, they were able to hold the superior British to a draw. During the battle, a young soldier was injured on the battlefield. When they carried him from the field, his wife, known as Molly Pitcher, took his place at his cannon. Her heroics followed her the rest of her life, and her monument, is it up? Her monument is a testimony that she, being dead, yet speaks, from Hebrews 11:4. That was what's said about Abel. So here is a young maid that, because of her act of bravery and love for country and love for the army, that stands today in Carlisle. I mean, I think that's absolutely amazing. That's absolutely amazing. She is long gone, but she still speaks concerning her bravery and the American Revolution. Questions or thoughts? I got something for you. I need several helpers. Let's let the girls do this one. First of all, if you can put up the picture of George Washington in prayer, there it is. And that's what you're getting today. This is from 1717. No, it's not. It's from 1977, so it's almost 50 years old. And it is the bicentennial stamp put out. So we're going to give you two ladies hand out these, then I'll show you. I promise you two things tonight because we combine two together. Now this is much older. This is from like 1928, 29. It's almost 100 years old. And interesting, this is for Molly Pitcher. And this is so interesting. I'm going to wait for everybody's attention. Yeah, as soon as everyone's finished talking, I'm going to take the floor again. Okay, this is a very interesting stamp for, I'm going to have these two do it, for Molly Pitcher. This is from like 1928, and the way they did it is a 2-cent stamp, and it is a side view of George Washington, and then this is actually how they did it. They simply printed over it Molly Pitcher. This is actually how it was used, and I know that because I talked to a stamp collecting aficionado, and he said this is exactly how they did it, and then he showed me another stamp that they did it the exact same way for another thing. So this is very old. There's some for you, and there's some for you, if you'll pass those out. Oh, you need more stamps? Make sure everybody got one. There you go. Make sure they... If you didn't get this one, raise your hand. If you didn't get George Washington kneeling, raise your hand. I want to make sure this one for everybody. That was the one I gave you earlier. That one I handled you. That was last week. Yeah. I announced in the first service, and I want to announce it today again in the evening service. What I'm planning to do as soon as we're completed the 12 weeks, we are then going to see The Chosen season 5, okay? And then I'm going to come back with this again, but I'm going to enlist you all as soldiers. These stamps, as George Real shared, are excellent witnessing tools. He went with his daughter and granddaughter and was able to share the whole story of the Battle of Brooklyn Heights and how God protected the army and so forth. So I'm going to encourage you all, and it's going to be like 8 weeks after we end this, because that's how long The Chosen is, that I would like to do this again, and but I would like for you all to pray about getting one person here. It can be any age from youth on up through adults. The reason being is, getting back to what President Trump said back in 2019, that he said we enter into a sacred vow not to forget our history. And the only way you're going to get it that I know of is whether a person is already in the line with like David Barton or someone, or what we're teaching here. And I think it's a tremendous tool that we have at our disposal to be able to give people a true understanding of our history, of our American history. Because, again, it's God's history. It's His story, God's involvement with us here in the United States. But that'll be coming up in the future. In the meantime, I found 3 other things to give you, like stamps, that you guys aren't getting in the first time around. Because by the time I found them, we'd already been through the battles. Speaking of, I found a wonderful stamp from the 1920s that represents the Battle of Monongahela, and it's got a full standing picture of a young George Washington. And so I've got that, and then I've got one that is tribute to Henry Knox, and I've got one other one that y'all won't be getting in this one, but in the next one, because I've got 3 I haven't found, but I think I found one of them tonight. The 3 that I haven't found are, hold on. Yeah, 1745, Thomas Prince and the prayer that saved the American colonies. Then the second one, Benedict Arnold. You know they're not going to make a stamp of Benedict Arnold. Okay, maybe over in Britain, but not here. But I did find something, a historical thing that I just got in contact with the gentleman that has enough that would be for our class, is what I'm saying. So that may be coming in time for Benedict Arnold, if we can work that out. And then there's one other one that I haven't gotten yet. But like for next time, I've already got like you all have gotten, I've got all these lined up. I've already got them, purchased them. And so I've already got 9 of the 12 weeks where something that you can touch and feel, that you can present to other people, to starting with our own children, because that's the original admonition from God in Joshua 4. He didn't say when put the 12 things there and then a preacher's going to come and preach a sermon. He said when your kids come by, you tell them. That means you need to know what it is that these mean. So that's what this course is doing. It's teaching us what we need to know to pass on the godly history, so our kids are just not like waffling with, all they got to do is meet one strong, charismatic individual that can lead them astray. Okay, so this is I think a responsibility that we have, and I just want to encourage you in that. Is there any questions or thoughts about tonight? Yeah.
What happened to Benedict Arnold?
To who?
Benedict Arnold.
Oh, he ended up. God bless you all. He ended up moving back into England. That's where he got paid to turn in Washington, but it failed. But he went there, and then he ended up. I think he was in the West Indies, and I'm trying to think. It'll be interesting when we do his story, because you'll be able to see why it is he got mad at George Washington. Very similar to why a man who lied about Thomas Jefferson, that started the rumor about him having his slave as a concubine and having a child and all, which has been proved to be totally false. Okay, but we have the record of the individual confessing of why he was so mad at Thomas Jefferson. The same thing with Benedict Arnold. He was extremely mad at George Washington to the point that he was willing to turn him over to the British, and he ended up, dying. What's the word? Ignominy. Whatever the word is. The what? Ignominy. Is that the word?
Why did the story about
Thomas Jefferson?
the guy with the Benjamin Franklin with the slave? Why did that start?
Are you talking about Thomas Jefferson and the slave?
Oh, that one.
Yeah, there was a man that hated Thomas Jefferson, so he started spreading a lie that he had a sexual relationship, while in Paris with a really trusted slave. Okay, and then that has been totally debunked through both DNA and through historical records to find out it was actually a member of his extended family that they believe was the person that was the perpetrator, even to the point where the people within the slave family took the name of this other person that they believed did it, took this last name.
What about all those descendants that said that they come from that?
Yeah, that's just all false. It's already been shown and proven. And I'll present that whole argument before we're done. But again, there is nothing new under the sun. You know, yeah, the only thing that they didn't accuse him of is that he was in cahoots with a Russian.
Oh, yeah, misinformation. Was there a laptop involved anyway?
Yeah, there might have been a laptop. Folks, there is nothing new under the sun. There isn't.
Same story, different face.
Yes, yes. And so you have to discern. Well, number one, you have to get facts, because the movie Jefferson in Paris was the presentation of that. So you had Hollywood mocking it up, and so that even spread it more. But actually, before the guy that started the lie died, he confessed that it was a lie. But that gets lost. That's like when something's in the newspaper and then there's the retraction. It's like the number of the number of jobs that were added, and then the next month it's 125,000 less, and it happens month after month after month. So you know it's a game they're playing. In other words, to keep people liking them, or however you want to say it. So we'll go through it though, because that's just the history. It's truth. You know, it's just. It repeats itself over and over and over again. But we here have to be knowledgeable and wise. I'll give you the quote of the day in just a minute. Yes.
Just a comment. Some of you may or may not know, but I spent a lot of days in the hospital the last week or so. And so I had family members sitting around. And
Okay.
what do you talk about when somebody's in ICU, intubated? I'm like, let's pray. And then, of course, I go into the Indian prophecy for George Washington.
Yes.
So I looked it up and I'm like, let me share with you something fascinating.
Amen.
So I sat there and we've never heard of such a thing. It was a perfect time.
That's wonderful. And again, here's Victor Provencio telling about his classroom in 1950. It's not going to be till 62, 63. But see, the majority of us weren't here in 50 going to 5th grade, okay? The quote of the day was by one of my favorite guys now, Javier Milei, the president of Argentina. It was quoted by, how many saw it? It was quoted by President Trump. If printing money could end poverty, then printing diplomas would end stupidity.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Javier Milei, because of my tie with Argentina, my love for Argentina, and then seeing the parallels between what God is doing there in Argentina versus here. And I'm just so prayerfully pulling for Argentina to go from 132nd in the world's economies to back when it was 3rd in the world's economies. And it's all going to be because they've got away from communistic socialism, which they had for 60 years, and come back to a free market system, which is biblical. Any other questions? I hope everybody's enjoying this. I'm loving this. I am loving this. History to me was boring. Oh, you got a question? No. History to me was boring. But as soon as you introduce God's hand in it and you follow that, then it becomes so exciting, because you see how God intervened in the nation's history. But also it creates in us a respect and honor for these people. How many want to go to Carlisle now to see that? Just stand at that monument and look at it.
We know the history.
Yeah, we know the history now. Hey, God bless you all, and drive carefully.